The Descendants of John Cogswell. This is Don Cogswell. And Don, you need to tell us a little bit about this book that you're looking at here.
Okay, this book was written by the Reverend E.O. Jameson. It's Ephraim Orcutt Jameson. I don't know what particular strain of religion he was, but he was a ordained minister, and he married a Cogswell, and she had some genealogical information that her family had accumulated, and he took a deep interest in it and began researching her family, and this is the result. It's a 500-something page book, and along the way, an interesting detail is that this was published in 1884. Reverend Jameson traveled around the country by horseback and by train, and he interviewed the people, asked them to bring out their family Bible, to give personal memories. That's why it's difficult to verify some of the information here, because it was oral information that Reverend Jameson took. And he, in some cases, he actually took people in his buckboard down to the town to see the photographer and had photographs made. And in his original, this is a lousy Xerox copy. It's a beautiful, I think it's called a tintype, but it may be a daguerreotype. I'm not sure. Anyway, and then they were covered with tissue paper so they wouldn't be damaged. And he did a beautiful job. He sold this book strictly by subscription, and my understanding is that he subscribed just under 500 copies.
Now, it's in public domain, and they have reprints of those.
Right.
But you're right. I have an I have an original,
Right.
and the original does have the tissue paper. It's fallen apart, but the actual engraved photographs look like you would see on a dollar bill.
Right.
It's like that. It's like a wood carving, and it's beautifully done.
Right.
But he did this as an act of love. So this was a long time ago, 500 copies, and then the Cogswell Family Association became a reality. What year?
1989. I was going to guess 89 or 90.
89 was the year. And
Okay.
whose idea was it that book should be updated?
Well, we should go back one step now. In my dedication here, this book is, the newer edition, is dedicated to Cyril Cogswell, and he's the one that, quite frankly, put up the money.
Okay, now that was for the Cogswell Family Association and the
To
book?
form the association.
Right. Okay,
And
but
he
then...
also left a bequest
Right.
that was to be used to further the goals of the association, and one of the goals was to eventually put out a book and update Jameson's work.
Okay, so how did you get involved in getting the second book? Okay, I guess, so your first book is really almost a volume 2.
Right.
Right. How did that come to be?
The truth is, and it's written in the introduction, is that the president of the association at that time was Bernice Sona, now deceased, and she called me up one night, late at night. My wife and I just finished watching a movie and getting ready to go to bed, and she said, "I just want to know why you haven't renewed your membership." And I told her, I said, "I don't want to have an argument with you or anything, but I'm going to tell you the truth, that I can't find my own lineage, and I thought maybe the Cogswell Family Association would be helpful." And I have written, and it's not going anywhere. I have not received any help of any kind. And I says, the young lady who is the current database keeper has almost no information whatsoever. And as it turns out, her father is the treasurer of the organization. And Bernice Sona asked me if I'd be willing to contribute to the organization other than financially, but to help out somehow. And I explained to her that I did a lot of research in college, and I enjoy doing research, but genealogy is not my strong suit. And I said, "But I'm a heck of a database keeper." And so you need a database keeper for this kind of volume of information. And the fact that you're going to expand on this, it could double in no time. And she said, "Would you be willing to do that?" And I said, I'd be willing to do my very best with no promises. About a week later, I received a cardboard box from the post office, and inside was a copy of Roots 3, a DOS program, genealogy program, and the previous family historian had entered a total of 11 names.
Wow.
And she just didn't want to do it. And I understand that. I mean, I know that you can assign people things and they'll drag their feet till it finally dawns on you they're not going to do it. And she just didn't want to do it. She was forced into it. She didn't like it and she didn't care about it. So I started out with 11 names, and a certain number of years later, this was the result, and I had accumulated over 30,000 names. The program, one night I was sitting in my office and I typed in a name and a date of birth and that sort of thing, and a message popped up on the computer screen and says, "You have exceeded the limits of this program." At that point, we trashed the DOS stuff. I kept the database, and I bought a Windows program, Roots Magic, and I think version 3 was the first one. I'm on version 7 now. They're getting ready to come up with 8. Anyway, and that one had a limit of 2 million names.
Okay, now let me get this straight now.
Okay.
Your name is spelled Cogswell, not with 2 G's. I mean, there's variations of the spelling.
Right.
And you had 30,000 entries in the book that you did.
Right.
And you didn't make it, there was no connection that you could make to John Cogswell?
Not for myself, no.
Not for yourself.
No.
So you spent how many hours on that first book? And it, very much a manual process, because this was before computers really got up and going. We're talking DOS. Do people even know what that is anymore?
Yeah.
That's like comparing an 8-track to an MP3, probably.
Right.
It's probably very similar, and the limitations that an 8-track had versus the limitations MP3s have. So you had a lot of limitations, as you explained. The computer ended up reaching its capacity, and you were still, though, ready to print. And this act of love, you weren't paid for this, doesn't make a connection between you and John Cogswell.
Right.
Frustrating?
Yes, in the very back of the book, I had a list of people who I knew who they were, but I could not connect them, and I listed them as unverified lineage, and I'm one of them.
Okay, so you're frustrated.
Yes.
Still frustrated? What happened? Follow the story.
No, what happened is I got connected with Ellie Gassert.
That's Ellie right there. Hello, Ellie. Now, Ellie, just for the record here, she has in her hand the book, Volume 1. Now, I wanted to compare. We'll talk about this, but I wanted to compare. That really should be stacked over here, because she's got Volume 1 of the new edition of this book, and we'll explain the new edition. But on the left-hand side is the edition that, what year was that published, Don?
1994?
96.
96. Okay, so that's the 96 book.
That's the 96 book.
With 30,000 entries. And you are, with what now?
It's more than 30.
More than 30. 30,000
I got the
new entries.
Windows program.
Oh,
that
okay.
accept up to 2 million.
Oh,
So there's well over 30,000. Now, it's not 30,000 Cogswells.
Right,
It's
right, right.
30,000 people.
okay.
And all of the Cogswells that I could find. And Jameson, a book, is included in this book.
Right.
So this brings Jameson forward to 1996.
And you corrected some of the mistakes that you found as best as you could.
Hundreds and hundreds of corrections.
Pre-computer age, really, basically. So,
Most of it done by mail. Right. And
Okay.
I just brought Ellie 2 more boxes of the correspondence because I want to save it for posterity. I'm not going to be around the next time somebody wants to go and look into one of these things, but I've kept all the letters that I wrote to other people and letters that they wrote to me, and it was all done by mail. And one of my little colorful anecdotes is that my sending a check, back in those days, you would mail a check to a library or a courthouse or an office of vital records, and down the bottom you write, not over $25. and then you tell them, here's a check. Would you find me a copy of so-and-so if you can, or find out whatever you can. And if you reach $25, stop. And back in those days, they would fill in $25 and send you a birth certificate, death certificate, marriage certificate, or whatever. And I have a lot of those in the box. And now Ellie sits on her computer and in 30 minutes comes up with a dozen birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, proof of their occupation, the birth dates of all their children. And this stuff, this used to take weeks to do it by mail sometimes. And I have examples in there that, well, I got this out of grandma's diary or some darn thing, but she was becoming senile when she filled out this. So we've made every effort to try to prove those things. Some cases we can't.
Okay, so I already kind of jumped ahead on this new 4-volume, the growth of what you have in your hand. That's what you started in 96?
Finished in 96.
Finished in 96 and printed in 96.
Right.
And now we have a new 4-volume set that is 4 times bigger than that book. Tell us, how did that happen?
Well, it began with the now deceased close personal friend of mine, John H. Cogswell. He's in Needham, Massachusetts. He was a elected selectman in the town. He retired from 9X, New England Telephone, whatever it is. And he was the chief accountant for the telephone company of New England. And he was very active in the CFA for he was one of the original founders, I believe.
Yes.
And he was the treasurer at the time. And he and I exchanged a lot of mail. And then as the computer age dawned on us, a lot of email. And he asked me a number of times, when are you going to do the next edition? He says, I know that you've collected a ton of information since this book was published. And I told him, you are correct.
There was a lot of laughing when he asked you that. There was a lot of laughing, and it seemed highly unlikely that such an event would occur.
Well, I had serious doubts. I told him on a couple of occasions, I'm not sure I'm going to live long enough. I said, this thing is ballooned, and I've got an enormous number of additions and corrections to the 96 book. And I says, and if there's a new edition, it's going to be huge. And I'm not sure that I'm up to the task. My health is not what it was when I was younger and that sort of thing. And he would just drop little hints from time to time to time. And then the current president of the CFA, this guy named Howard Cogswell.
I've heard of him.
Put a little more pressure on me than John, we call him Jack Cogswell, was always delicate and nibbled around the edges and all that stuff. Howard had a little different approach to the problem, and he didn't ask me if I'm going to do it. He said, when are you going to do it? And eventually I said, well, let me look through what I have here and see what this project's going to involve. And about a year later, I told Howard, I said, I think I'm almost done with this project. And it's not ready for the printer yet, but it will be soon. And that's how it really transpired.
Okay, now we want to back up a little bit on because I kind of jumped ahead. Sorry about that,
That's
Ellie.
okay.
But okay, how do you meet up with Ellie, and how does Ellie become part of this, and how does Ellie make this long lost connection that you, through your tireless research, failed at?
Well, in those boxes of papers, one of them is from Vital Records in New Jersey. That's where I got lost, was in New Jersey.
A lot of people have gotten lost in New Jersey,
Yes.
let me just
The
say.
problem is that the county boundaries changed over and over and over and over again, and all the records are jumbled up. And because a record is in Trenton, it may have absolutely nothing to do with Trenton, New Jersey. It could be from one of 4 or 5 other counties. Anyway, I've got checks where they said, they've cashed the $25 check and then sent me a little letter saying, you mailed your request to the wrong room. It's the right building, but the wrong room. So you can resubmit your request with another check. And I told Jack, I says, I think I'm almost as frugal as anybody else's organization, and I can't keep this up. I mean, you could keep mailing $25 checks forever and never find what you want. So I went to the DAR library with a friend of mine. We were both members of the Sons of the American Revolution at the time, and we spent an entire day and got a parking ticket in DC in the DAR library, and there's a ton of New Jersey stuff in there, and it's just as confused as everybody else's New Jersey records, and I did not find the proof. One of my ancestors, I believe, was very, very deeply in debt, and he fled Connecticut, and not one word, his name's Robert Cogswell, there's not one word about Robert Cogswell anywhere in New England after that certain date. And within about 6 months, a certain Robert Cogswell suddenly appears in New Jersey, and he gets a job as a tax collector and something having to do with the maintenance of the roads. And I shared this information with Ellie, and Ellie can tell you what she did with it.
Now, how did you meet Ellie? Was Ellie a member of the CFA, or I mean, how did Ellie? You tell us when you first connected with Don and what happened.
I found information on my family. My grandmother was a Cogswell, and as I did the research, I'm not bashful, so I got on my computer in New Jersey, Toms River, New Jersey, and I said, Cogswells in Florida. And I called every single Cogswell in Florida until I hit Don and Pat. That's where we started.
And you called him and said what? Hi, Don. You're a Cogswell.
No, I said, hi, Don. My name is Ellie Gassert, and I have Cogswells in my family. And at first he suggested somebody, because he had no record of it, that I could ask. This person could not help me in any way, shape, or form. So John and...
Without sending $25.
No, this was a person, and he didn't want to give up the information. So Don and I started chatting back and forth, and he gave me a few hints. Well, I get on the computer and I look around New Jersey, and lo and behold, there's all the records, tax records. And like Don said, they were mixed up in all the different counties. And part of the mix-up in the counties had to do with the government. They wanted to change the boundaries of the counties, so that one particular party could win. So you really had to go tracking down all the different counties, the date of when they changed, to look for the information. And I finally found Don's information. And what I had started, from right there on then, when I found his, and I hadn't found mine, the adventure began. And I only found mine about, was it a year or two ago? And I finally found my lineage that went all the way back. And it hit a William Cogswell who had fought in the Civil War and ended up dying in Ohio. Everything you have to do, you have to trace back over and over and over again, and every little piece of information could be a tidbit of what you're looking for. So through all my bashfulness, Don and Pat and I became friends on the phone. Didn't meet until about 10 years later when we went down to Sebring and we were heading back home. As another interjection, while they were wanting him to write a book, he was telling me about it. And he was also saying, I want to retire. So I got the job as historian. And then when we decided to do the backup book, everybody wanted just one person to do the database and the research, and you can't do that. It takes more than one person. So Don and I collaborated together. He'd send me information, send it back to me, and I'd read it, find corrections, and send it back to him until we had the final editions. And since it was so many years later and so much more update of information, especially in some states, you're able to find birth certificates, death certificates. Minnesota's a great state. Pennsylvania's a great state. Ohio's a great state where you could find all this dedicated, truthful verification of family history.
And you really love the investigating. I mean, basically, you're more the researcher than,
Yes.
and Don is more the person who just basically is a data keeper. And although there's
And it works together so well that as I'm doing this record keeping, I'll start plugging in, oh, I found his brother. Oh, and I found his brother's wife's father was so-and-so in the Civil War or whatever. As I'm putting these together, I send copies to Ellie. She says, hell, if we had known that, we could have found this guy. And she's on the computer, and next thing I know, a half an hour later, she's emailing me the birth certificate for the person that I'm looking for all the time. So it worked out perfectly that my record keeping helped her in her research to some extent. And her research was just invaluable to putting this book together.
okay. Well, now let's move up a little bit. Okay, so you guys are together, and you've got the connection now. Don knows that he can go all the way back to John Cogswell, and it's not in your book. Well, and then the CFA, through a number of meetings, all kinds of issues can occur when you're trying to get this big project going. First of all, we had 2 volunteers who, how many hours of time did you guys put into these 4 volumes?
It's years, not hours.
Well, you could always hours. I mean, thousands and thousands, but over years and years.
Can't be enumerated.
Right.
And-
At the same time, the proofreading and that kind of stuff, I would work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week on the book, and weeks and weeks and weeks on end, because it's one of those things that once you get into it, you don't want to stop, and you don't want new information to come being plugged in while you work. You want to finish the job. So how many hours altogether, I have no idea, but it's...
And the tree grows and grows and
Right.
grows. And what's the limitations that you put on the new 4-volume set? It grows from 1 volume to a 4-volume set. What limitations of relationship to John Cogswell?
The relationship to John Cogswell is DNA. There are people in here who have not had a Cogswell in their family for 4 or 5 generations.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the female children have married a man, taken his last name, then they have female children who marry a man, take his last name. As long as they all can trace back to John Cogswell, they're Cogswell descendants in my judgment. But this is the last time that you can do that. I mean, the record has gotten so enormous that if it were to continue, you'd have a 8, 10, 12 volume set.
An Encyclopedia Britannica.
Nobody could afford
Yes.
it, and nobody would really want it in the first place. I think any future volume is probably going to have to be the way the screen is. I wish I had my computer here to show you. With the Roots Magic 7 is grandparent, parent, and children. And I think that any future volume, that's going to have to be it. That as long as a grandparent is named Cogswell, and that would include Ellie, that her mother is Del Castillo.
Del Costello and my
Well, her mother
mother,
was,
right, my grandmother was a Cogswell.
right.
But there's thousands of living people still living that are in these books
Oh,
Right.
yes.
right now, and they're connected
Right.
to John Cogswell.
And if they
Now-
have Cogswell DNA, they have a Cogswell number, which indicates their exact numerical descent from John Cogswell.
Now, you did something a little different on this 4-volume set. on the 96 book, you just kind of wrote a little introduction. It wasn't really long. And you used a lot of what Jameson originally did.
Right.
But this time you did something different. Tell us about that.
Well, I tried to add a little more information. There's been a lot of research in efforts to uncover the Angel Gabriel. They know that ship is there, and that cold salt water preserves a lot of the stuff. And I mean, they're picking up cannons from the 12 and 1300s, a ship from the 1600s. They know that those cannons are down there somewhere, but the whole area is full of iron ore. So every time they do the magnetic thing, it turns up so much static that they can't get down to the cannon. Anyway, a fella has recently come up with a new, very, very reasonable theory about the ship being in a place that has not been searched before, and it seems eminently reasonable that's where the ship really is. And I don't know what progress he's made lately on the thing, but he's involved in it. So I tried to include some information on the Angel Gabriel.
Okay, for those who don't know, Ellie, tell us about the Angel Gabriel.
Okay, the Angel Gabriel has 2 points of history to me. In the early 1500s, 1600s, it brought my Del Castello family down to Paramaribo in Suriname. And then shortly after, it was changed to the Angel Gabriel along with the Jamestown and came to America in 1635, bringing the Cogswell lineage. Queen Elizabeth owned the ship. Her favorite person, Sir Walter Raleigh, was on that ship. So the lineage comes in, and like Don said, yes, it is somewhere in that bay.
Okay, people who don't know the story. So what happens? Okay, it brings John Cogswell, and where does it bring John Cogswell to?
To Pemaquid Point, Maine.
Okay, and the ship is there anchored, and what happens?
Anchored, and they met their first nor'easter.
And they didn't have the Weather Channel back then.
No, they didn't. And
So what happened?
Totally destroyed and broke the ship apart. It hit rocks. The Jamestown was smart enough to stay, or the James was smart enough to stay out in open water. Even though it was rough, it didn't take the ship down. Close to the shore with the rocks, it took out the Angel Gabriel. It just literally broke it apart into pieces.
And it hasn't been found yet. And that's what Don was talking about.
But a lot of the reasons that there's only certain times of the year that they can dive in that area to even go down and look. Even with the submarines that they have, the one-man submarines that they can go down and look, it is so rough in there, and there's only like 2 or 3 months out of the whole year that they can do that kind of research. So each year they have to wait. They look for up until the nth degree of time, and then when it gets too rough, they have to leave.
Okay, Don?
Another problem, in addition to that, this gentleman says the best anchorage in the entire Pemaquid Harbor area just happens to today be in use by the owners of million-dollar yachts who pay a lot of money for the right to moor their boats in the premier area of the bay. And he says that the captain, Andrews, I believe his name was, of the Angel Gabriel, most certainly would have found the premier spot to anchor. He thinks that's where the boat is, and there's only a couple of months out of the year when those boats are hauled into dry dock and clean the bottoms, all that kind of stuff. And so far, he has not been able to get permission to search that area where he believes the Angel Gabriel is. And another little factoid is that August 15th, 1635, in 1884, Reverend Jameson wrote, "There is still evidence of that hurricane." It may have been the strongest hurricane ever recorded in America. August 15th, 1635. John Cogswell, his 8 children, everything he owned in the world, and his wife were on that ship.
Early American global warming.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, famous Cogswells. Tell us.
I listed a whole gang of them in the beginning of volume 1. We have presidents, governors,
Abigail Adams.
captains of industry,
Throw some names out there.
J.P. Morgan,
Okay.
Eisenhower.
Mamie Eisenhower,
Okay.
Bunker Hunt and his brother who tried to corner the silver market,
Princess Diana.
Calvin Coolidge, one of
Yes.
my all-time heroes, is a descendant of John Cogswell. Other presidents,
And you did say Princess Diana.
yes,
So all of her children and
her
grandchildren.
children and grandchildren are all Cogswell descendants. Her maiden name was Spencer, and the Spencer family is directly descended from John Cogswell. And we received a letter at one of the reunions, I think it might have been in South Carolina. Anyway, we invited the Queen and Princess Diana to attend our family reunion, where we wanted to present them with certificate, the lineage from John Cogswell, etc. And their secretary sent us a very, very nice letter explaining why they had previous engagements. It would be.
And where is that letter?
I have absolutely no idea.
Ah,
It's filed in a safe place.
probably. It should be in the book, right? But
Yeah, it should. Yeah, I wonder who was the president at the time.
That's
interesting. Well, speaking of the book, I can't help but ask, how would one acquire this special 4-volume set loaded with Cogswell data and updated with photographs? Are they up
Oh yes.
new information? Tell us, why should someone spend the kind of money that a 4-volume set would cost to have this? What are the benefits of having it?
it's proof of your ancestry. All the way back to the 1300s, the 1400s, the 1500s. Sometimes in the English language that we can't read or understand because their S's are look like F's.
I've included very, very much
But
of the
it's-
documentation that Ellie has turned up. And so the birth certificates are right there in the book.
Without having to pay the $25.
Without having,
I got them for
yes.
free.
So
And
you've
these
got,
4 volumes now, they include the Jameson book.
Okay.
That's included in it.
but it's updated.
And they include
Uh,
the 1996 book. And then they bring the family forward with hundreds and hundreds of corrections
Mm-hmm.
and additions. And the 4th volume, because it includes mostly the living Cogswells now alive, we did that in color. So there are color photographs of a lot of this generation of Cogswells who are still alive.
Okay, now what almost prevented these 4 volumes, this new project getting off the ground, was how do you put all this information, know that it's right, make sure that it's properly done. I mean, people have their own opinions on how it should be done, and there were some very contentious calls back and forth about this can't be done, shouldn't be done this way, should be done that way. So how do you speak about that? How do you do such a great undertaking and be able to be proud about it and know that you've done the best you can do?
Well, what I can tell you is that there are volumes of genealogy that are published by professional genealogists with strings of letters behind their names, some of them PhDs, that sort of thing. And they have researched to the nth degree, but in many cases, it's a small number of people. And then you can do a big, thick volume on 50 or 75 people if you know every facet of their life. We have not made an effort to do that. We have made every effort possible to find the correct name of the person, the date and place where they were born, where they were married, who were their children, and what happened to their children. Did they marry and have children? And then accurate deaths of dates, date of death, and place of death. We've included death certificates when they're available, but we don't make any claims that every single word in the book is absolutely perfect. We've done the best that we could between the two of us to try and find the best information we could. But as I said, sometimes we got information from Grandma's diary. We got information from people's family Bible, and the family Bible page says what a horrible sin it is to enter any lies on this page. And we've uncovered some inaccuracies where maybe the child was born fewer than 9 months after the parents got married. And that was a terrible disgrace 100 years ago. Today it means absolutely nothing, but back in those days it did mean something. And we forgive them for making little minor errors. And if we can make corrections, we do. Where we cannot make corrections, we provide the information that was available to us.
And handwriting, reading handwriting can be
Yes.
tough, especially when they write in Old English. And I mean, it can be tough, right?
I have letters from the 1880s that my great-grandfather wrote to Reverend Jameson, and it's what they call a photostat. It's a black background with white lettering, and it's almost impossible to read. I mean, I have studied it for years, and I can decode 50% of it. And I know that my great-grandfather, Frederick Augustus Cogswell, was very anxious to discover his lineage and that sort of thing. Jameson was anxious to help him, and it just didn't work and at that time. So,
Okay, what about future information? Does the project end here?
no, Ellie is going to continue on as a historian of the Cogswell Family Association, and Tammy Walker has taken over my job as database keeper, and both of them intend to continue collecting information as long as they're able to and willing to. And, the database will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually it'll get so big that you couldn't possibly publish it all, and it's going to have to be condensed.
Okay, now I'm going to ask Don and Ellie how you want to be remembered. But first, I'm going to pan over to Pat. Pat Cogswell, who she put up with how many hours and hours of research and cigars?
Oh, I didn't see my husband for days, only at dinner time, for years, of weeks at a time, believe me. So.
Well, we would like to thank you for your sacrifice as well in helping to make this project a reality.
You're quite welcome.
Ellie, how do you want to be remembered?
First as a loving mother and wife, and then a progenitor, and someone who carries on the legacy of our family.
And you, Don?
I'm going to square them out and tell you that I'm going to have to leave that decision to others. I don't have a reasonable answer for you how I want to be remembered. I'm going to have to leave that up to others.
Well, I personally would like to say that I remember both of you now in a very thankful approach for all of the efforts and everything that you have done to make this project a reality. I hope that anybody that's watching this that is considering buying the book understands what went into making this happen and that they make it a reality on their end.
How do they get this book, Howard?
Well, didn't we tell them how to get it?
No, we didn't.
Well, Pat, why don't you tell them how to get it?
Well, you can go to the wonderful Cogswell website, which is www.cogswellfamily.org, and you will find a order form there at the bottom of the first page, and you can buy your own 4-volume edition of this book.
And there were only 100 printed.
Only 100 printed, and they're only $299, and that includes the postage.
Wow. Thanks for your time, everyone. You have a great one.